Fact 1. Can America really go bankrupt? Most people believe America can never go bankrupt, because in their minds, America is not just a country. It is power, money, control, and dominance combined. But the truth is far darker and far more complicated than that simple belief. Because America does not collapse the way normal countries collapse. It does not wake up one day and announce bankruptcy. Instead, it slowly bleeds trust, confidence, and stability until one day the system simply stops responding. And to understand this, you must first understand one terrifying fact. America does not survive because it is rich. America survives because the world believes in the dollar. For decades, the US dollar has been the backbone of the global economy. Oil is sold in dollars. International trade runs on dollars. Central banks store dollars. Even countries that hate America still depend on its currency, which is print unlimited money without immediate collapse. It does not reduce spending. It does not stop borrowing. So massive that even paying interest has become a burden. But trust is not permanent. It does not break slowly. It breaks suddenly. And if the world ever decides that holding US debt is no longer safe, America cannot simply print its way out anymore. Because printing money only works when people believe that money has value. America's bankruptcy would not start with empty banks or government shutdowns. Fact 2. The dollar is America's biggest weapon, and the world's biggest trap. Most people think the US dollar is just a currency, like any other money used to buy food, fuel, or houses. But in reality, the dollar is not money. It is a global control system, because the modern world does not run on gold. It does not run on trust between countries. It runs on the dollar, and this is the reason America can survive debt that would instantly destroy any other nation. Because almost everything that keeps the world alive is priced, traded, and settled in dollars. Oil is the best example. For decades, most countries have been forced to buy oil in dollars, which means every country must first earn or borrow dollars before it can even keep its lights on, its factories running, or its transport moving. And this single rule has given America godlike power over the global economy. Because when the world needs dollars, America can create them at will, sell them as debt, and get real goods and real labor in return. This is why America can import more than it exports. spend more than it earns, and still survive, because the world absorbs the cost. But this system only works as long as one belief stays alive, the belief that the dollar will always be accepted everywhere. The moment this belief cracks, the entire structure starts shaking. Because if countries stop needing dollars, America loses its superpower overnight. And this is not a theory. This is already slowly happening beneath the surface. Some countries are trying to trade oil without dollars. Some are increasing gold reserves instead of dollar reserves. Some are building alternative payment systems to escape US financial control. And why are they doing this? Because the dollar has been weaponized. America uses its currency as a punishment tool, freezing bank reserves, blocking international payments, cutting countries off from the global system. And this has scared the world. Because if dollars can be turned off by political decisions, then dollars are no longer neutral money. They are a risk, and risk is poison for global trust. And here is the most dangerous part. America itself has become addicted to this system. It prints dollars because it borrows because the world allows it. But every time new dollars are created, the value of existing dollars quietly erodes. Inflation spreads globally. Prices rise everywhere. And the cost is paid not by America alone, but by anyone holding dollars. And people don't notice it immediately, because inflation does not explode. It creeps, slowly stealing purchasing power, slowly destroying savings. And by the time people realize, the damage is already done. And this creates a silent rebellion against the dollar. Not loud, not dramatic, but gradual. Countries don't announce they are abandoning the dollar. They just reduce exposure, little by little, year by year. And America watches this very carefully, because it knows one terrifying truth. If demand for dollars falls sharply, America cannot finance its debt anymore. Interest rates would skyrocket. Printing more money would cause uncontrolled inflation, and the illusion of stability would vanish. And this is why the dollar is both America's shield and its weakness. Because the stronger the dollar's grip, the more enemies it creates, and the weaker the trust becomes over time. And when people say America will never fall, they forget one thing. Empires do not collapse because they are attacked. They collapse because the systems that support them stop being trusted. And the dollar is not protected by armies. It is protected by belief. And belief is the most fragile thing in the world. It can survive lies for years, but when it breaks instantly. And if the dollar ever loses its central position, America does not slowly adjust. It faces shock, because its entire economy is built on the assumption that the world will always want dollars. And this is why the real question is not whether America will lose power, but whether the world can escape the dollar without destroying itself in the process. Because the moment that escape accelerates, the consequences will not stay limited to banks or governments. They will reach homes, jobs, savings, and daily life across the planet. And this was only the second layer. Because in the next fact you will see what happens inside banks and markets when trust starts dying, and why financial collapse always hits faster than anyone expects. Fact 3. And when trust dies, banks fall first. People think financial collapse begins with governments announcing emergencies or stock markets crashing on television screens. But in reality, collapse always starts in a far quieter and more terrifying way. It starts when trust disappears inside the banking system. Because banks do not survive on money, they survive on confidence. Most people believe their money is safely sitting in bank vaults, but that belief is an illusion. Banks keep only a tiny fraction of deposits as cash. The rest is loaned out, invested, or tied into complex financial systems. And this works perfectly as long as people do not panic. But the moment fear enters the system, everything changes. And this is exactly what would happen if America's debt crises turned into a loss of confidence in the dollar. Banks would not collapse because they are empty. They would collapse because everyone wants their money at the same time. And no bank in the world can survive that. And here is the part most people never understand. Modern banks are deeply connected. One bank's problem is not isolated. It spreads instantly through digital systems, markets, and credit networks. And if investors begin to doubt US debt, bond prices fall, interest rates rise, and banks holding those bonds suddenly face massive losses on paper. And when losses appear, lending freezes. Banks stop trusting each other. Overnight, lending dries up, and credit, which is the blood of the economy, stops flowing. And this is when panic quietly begins. Businesses cannot get loans, companies cannot pay suppliers, salaries are delayed, and people start to feel something is wrong. But the news still says everything is under control, and then stock markets react. Not because companies suddenly became bad, but because fear spreads faster than logic. Algorithms sell, investors run, and trillions in paper value vanish in days, sometimes hours, and governments step in promising stability, printing more money, guaranteeing deposits. But this is where the trap closes, because saving banks requires creating more dollars, and creating more dollars when trust is already falling accelerates inflation, which hits the real world immediately. Prices rise, food becomes expensive, fuel costs explode, rent increases, and ordinary people start feeling poorer every month. And here is the most brutal truth. Banks are protected first, not people. Governments rush to save the financial system because if banks die, everything dies. But in doing so, they sacrifice purchasing power. Because the system was never designed for everyone to exit at once, and this is when fear turns into chaos. And confidence collapses completely. And once that happens, no amount of speeches or promises can restore it quickly, because trust in banking is like glass. Once cracked, it never returns to its original strength. And this is why financial collapses move faster than wars, because armies take time to mobilize. But fear moves at the speed of information, and in a digital world, that speed is instant. And America is not immune to this, because its banks are among the largest and most interconnected in the world, holding massive amounts of government debt, derivatives, and complex financial products, which means a shock in U.S. confidence would not stay inside America. It would ripple globally, pulling down markets, pensions, insurance funds, and savings across countries. And the most frightening part is that by the time authorities admit there is a real problem, the system is already deep into the collapse phase, because financial systems do not warn loudly. They whisper until they scream. And this is why every major economic disaster in history looks obvious only in hindsight. And this fact leads to an even darker question. If banks and markets fall first, what happens next to ordinary people when money itself stops behaving normally? And that is exactly what the next fact will reveal. Fact 4. When money stops working, normal life ends. People imagine economic collapse as numbers falling on screens, stock charts turning red, or politicians arguing on television. But the real collapse is felt far away from trading floors. It enters kitchens, markets, streets, and homes. Because when money stops behaving normally, daily life begins to break down in ways most people are completely unprepared for. And if America's financial system ever entered a true confidence crisis, the first shock for ordinary people would not be news headlines. It would be prices, because inflation is the fastest messenger of collapse. Food becomes expensive almost overnight. Fuel prices spike. Transportation costs rise. And every product that depends on global trade suddenly costs more. Salaries do not increase at the same speed. Savings lose value silently, and people start realizing that the money they worked years to earn no longer buys the same life. And this creates anger and fear at the same time, because people feel robbed but cannot see the thief. Not in one big wave, but in constant cuts. Companies freeze hiring, reduce hours, and delay payments. And for many families, this is the moment survival mode begins. Cutting meals, skipping medical care, delaying rent. And here is the part no one likes to talk about. Social stability depends on predictability. When people cannot predict prices, jobs, or access to money, trust between citizens erodes. Panic buying starts. Shelves empty, not because there is no food, but because everyone is afraid tomorrow will be worse than today. And governments respond with controls, limits on withdrawals, emergency measures, and reassuring speeches. But these actions often confirm people's worst fears instead of calming them. And once restrictions appear, People stop trusting the system completely. Cash becomes king, but even cash loses power as inflation accelerates, and alternative assets like gold, goods, or foreign currencies suddenly matter more than bank balances. And this is where society begins to fracture. Crime increases. Protests grow, political extremes gain support, because fear makes people desperate for simple answers. And America, despite its wealth, is not immune to this, because its population is deeply dependent on debt, credit cards, loans, and monthly payments. And when interest rates rise and incomes fall, millions are pushed to the edge very quickly. And unlike poor countries where people are used to instability, modern societies are extremely fragile, because they are built on systems that assume everything will work tomorrow the same way it worked yesterday. And when that assumption breaks, the shock is severe. And here is the darkest truth. Governments always try to protect order, not comfort. Which means when things get bad, stability is enforced, not guaranteed. Rules become stricter, surveillance increases, emergency powers expand, and freedoms quietly shrink in the name of security. And most people accept this because fear makes safety more important than liberty. And this is how economic collapse transforms into social transformation, slowly changing how people live, think, and behave. And this is why historians say financial disasters are not just about money, they reshape societies. And if America ever faced such a crisis, it would not look like a movie with explosions. It would look like a slow, grinding pressure that changes daily life until people no longer recognize the country they live in. And the most terrifying part is that once society adapts to crisis mode, returning to normal becomes extremely difficult, because systems built for emergency are rarely dismantled quickly. And this leads to the final and most dangerous question of all. If America falls into such a state, what happens to the rest of the world that is tied to it? And that is exactly what the final fact will expose. Fact 5. If America falls, the world does not escape. Many people believe that if America ever collapses financially, the rest of the world will simply move on and build a new system. But this belief is dangerously naive, because the modern global economy is not a collection of independent countries. It is a tightly connected machine with America at its core. And when the core fails, shockwaves travel everywhere at the same time. Because global trade, banking, insurance, shipping, technology, and finance are deeply linked to the US system. And if confidence in America and the dollar collapses, international trade slows immediately. Not because goods disappear. Shipping companies hesitate, and supply chains that were built over decades begin to crack. And countries that depend on exports to the US lose markets overnight, while countries that depend on imports priced in dollars face sudden cost surges. And here's the most frightening part. Despite years of talk about alternatives, no currency today has the depth, liquidity, and global acceptance to instantly replace the dollar. It would stumble violently, and this creates a power vacuum. And power vacuums are never peaceful. Economic stress turns into political pressure, alliances weaken, competition intensifies, and countries prioritize survival over cooperation. Protectionism rises, borders tighten, and global growth slows dramatically. And in this environment, geopolitical tensions increase, because history shows that major economic crises often lead to conflict. Not because leaders want war, but because stressed systems seek external solutions to internal problems. And at the same time, new systems begin forming under pressure. Regional trade blocs grow stronger, local currencies are pushed, digital currencies expand, and gold regains importance as a neutral asset. But this transition is chaotic, unequal, and painful, benefiting some while destroying others. And ordinary people across the world pay the price through higher living costs, job losses, and reduced opportunities. And the illusion that America's problems are America's problems alone disappears completely. Because pensions in Europe, factories in Asia, commodities in Africa, and savings in developing countries are all connected to the same financial bloodstream. And when that bloodstream clots, the pain is global. And this is why the idea of America collapsing without global consequences is a myth. Because empires do not fall quietly. They drag systems down with them. And the most unsettling truth is that such a collapse would not immediately create a better world. It would create an unstable one, where rules are rewritten by power, not fairness. And the question then becomes not who is right, but who is prepared. And history is brutal in this regard. Those who adapt early survive better. Those who deny reality suffer the most. And this brings the story to its darkest conclusion. America's strength built the modern world. Its currency shaped global life. And its debt now threatens the same system it created. And whether America falls completely or transforms into something weaker but stable, one fact remains unavoidable. The era of unquestioned dominance is fading, and the world is slowly moving toward a future where uncertainty replaces certainty, and control replaces trust. And the real danger is not collapse itself, but the chaos of transition. Because when old systems die and new ones are not ready, fear fills the gap, and fear changes everything. And that is the final truth. Most people are not ready to face the fall of America. If it ever happens, will not be the end of the world, but it will be the end of the world as we know it. Bonus fact: America does not need to fall. The system can collapse without IT. Most people imagine America's collapse as a dramatic event where the country itself fails. Banks shut forever, the government stops functioning, and the flag metaphorically burns. But the most dangerous scenario is not America falling. It is the global system collapsing while America technically survives. Because modern power is no longer about borders. It is about systems. And the American financial system is so deeply embedded into global life that it can poison everything around it without fully dying itself. And this is what makes the situation truly terrifying. Because America can continue operating while slowly exporting instability to the rest of the world. And this has already happened in smaller forms. Every time America prints massive amounts of money to solve its internal problems, inflation does not stay inside America. It leaks outward, weakening other currencies, raising global prices, and silently draining wealth from countries that had no say in the decision. And this creates a hidden collapse, not announced, not televised, but deeply felt. And here's the darkest part. And once trust disappears, efficiency dies, costs rise, and growth slows everywhere, creating a permanent, low-level crisis that feels endless. And people adapt to it without realizing they are living inside a broken system. And this is far more dangerous than a sudden crash, because slow collapse numbs societies, making them accept lower standards of living as normal. And this benefits those at the top who control assets, while destroying upward mobility for everyone else. And this is why some analysts say the future danger is not a financial explosion but a financial suffocation, where opportunities shrink, inequality explodes, and hope slowly fades. And America, even if weakened, can remain dominant in such a world because dominance no longer requires prosperity. It requires control, and control thrives in chaos. And this leads to a chilling conclusion. The question is not whether America will fall, but whether the system it created can ever return to stability without a painful reset, because systems built on endless debt and infinite growth eventually face limits. And when those limits are reached, they do not announce themselves politely. They rewrite the rules brutally. And the scariest part is that most people will realize what happened only years later. looking back and wondering when life became so fragile. And that is the most dangerous collapse of all. The one you survive physically but lose too slowly, without ever hearing the sound of it breaking.